The galaxy is a tomb, yet some fates are worse than death. Imagine the silence of a sarcophagus that breathes with you, bleeds with you, and thinks with you, even though your body is already gone. Imagine being both prisoner and weapon, forever interred within a shell of ceramite and adamantium, dragged back from the embrace of the Emperor not to live but to endure. To exist within a dreadnought is to be denied the end. It is to burn in the limbo between memory and machine, human and war construct, voice and vox scream. It is a fate whispered about in hushed tones even among the adeptus astartes, for the glory of such an existence is laced with horror, and its sanctity is haunted by despair. The end should have been simple. A flash of pain, a final roar into the void, and then silence beneath the Emperor's gaze. That was what I believed when the orc's cleaver split through the plates of my armor, and I felt the heat of my lifeblood pouring out into the dust. I remembered the taste of iron filling my throat. I remembered the weight of my chainsword slipping from fingers that no longer obeyed, and I remembered the sky above me, vast and choked with smoke, as my vision narrowed to a tunnel of ash and light. I thought then that I was finished, that the Emperor had counted my deeds, and was ready to fold me into his endless ranks. Death, at last, after years of blood and glory, but the silence never came. Instead there were voices, urgent, muffled, distorted through the haze of pain, brother serfs dragging me from the ruin, apothecaries bending over my ruinous form, the buzzing of mechadendrites, the clatter of surgical instruments, prayers whispered in half-chant as though even they were not sure what they were doing. I wanted to tell them to stop, to let me go. My body was gone, my chest was opened, my limbs shattered, and my lungs had collapsed into ragged meat, and yet they would not listen. I drifted between darkness and the pale glow of lumen strips, caught in the void between death and survival. Sometimes I saw their faces, sometimes only the gold of the Aquila hanging above me, blurred by tears and blood. I felt myself falling deeper into the abyss, and I wanted that fall. I craved it. But the hands that pulled me back belonged not to men but to duty itself, to the chapter, to a destiny I had not chosen. The first true awakening was not a moment of clarity, but of horror, cold, not the cold of air, but the cold that sank into the marrow, if marrow I still possessed. I tried to move and found nothing answered me. My limbs were gone, replaced by absence, and when I strained against that void I felt resistance, as though my mind had been bolted into place. That was the first time I felt the sarcophagus, the first time I realized I had not died, but been imprisoned. I could hear now, though not through ears. Sound came as a metallic vibration, a rumble through vox grills and resonators. I heard the low chant of tech marines at their work, voices raised in the canticles of the Omnissiah as they sealed me into the iron tomb. Each syllable was a chain, each litany hammered the lid tighter. I tried to scream, and though no sound left me, something surged through the vox res, static broken words, the pitiful gasp of a man who wanted to be left in peace. They answered not with mercy but with ritual, telling me I was blessed. Blessed. The coffin closed, darkness was absolute. I thought I had been blind before, but this was blindness of another kind, a blindness that pressed against the soul. I was weightless and yet crushed, suspended in fluid that burned the nerves raw, locked into clamps that no mortal muscle could resist. My mind became the only part of me that moved, and even that was shackled by the interfaces boring into my skull. Time bled away. Hours, days, it was impossible to know. Pain never left. It was not the hot agony of the battlefield, but a cold ache that seeped into everything. They kept me on the edge of awareness, refusing me the release of unconsciousness. I began to understand that death had been denied me not by accident, but by design. I had been chosen. My chapter had refused to let me go. At last the moment came when the tomb stirred. A thrum of power vibrated through the casing, a hum that resonated in the back of my skull. Symbols flared against my mind, alien machine code, half comprehensible, half gibberish. The sarcophagus awakened, and with it, and in that moment, I realized the truth. I had not been saved. I had not been honored. I had been bound, forever, to this shell. I was no longer flesh, I was entombed, and somewhere buried beneath the pain, the despair, and the confusion, a question began to coil like a serpent in the dark. Was this truly a gift of the Emperor, or was it a curse that no warrior deserved? The first time I walked again, it did not feel like walking. It was movement without sensation, an echo of what my body once knew. Hydraulic limbs shifted, pistons hissed, adamantine feet crushed stone beneath their weight, and yet I felt none of it. No texture of earth, no strain of muscle, no breath filling lungs with the copper tang of war, only the mechanical feedback of servos turning, relayed through circuits that impersonated nerves. My steps were not my own, they belonged to the sarcophagus, and I was its unwilling passenger. The tech marines celebrated as though a miracle had been achieved. They spoke of the Emperor's hand guiding the work, of the Omnissiah's blessing flowing through my new shell. To them, I was not a man who had been spared from death. I was an instrument preserved, reforged into a weapon too valuable to waste. Their reverence was suffocating, because I knew their prayers were not for me but for the machine they had bound me to. The warrior I had been was already gone. What remained was utility. I tried to remember the life before, clinging to fragments like a drowning man clutching driftwood. My brother's laughter around the fire after battle, the feel of my bolt gun's recoil as it barked in perfect rhythm with my heartbeat, the scent of promethium burning in the ruins of an enemy stronghold, even pain itself, the sting of a blade cutting through my armor, the warm rush of blood, those memories ached with longing because they were real, because they had belonged to a man who lived. Now they taunted me, they reminded me of a past I would never touch again. Days passed or weeks, time was a blur inside the iron coffin. They marched me through tests, firing ranges, combat drills, field trials with squads I once would have commanded. Every moment confirmed what I already knew, that I was a stranger among my own kind. The battle brothers who once stood shoulder to shoulder with me now looked up at the towering shell I inhabited with awe and sometimes fear. Their eyes did not see me. They saw the Dreadnought, the venerable relic. They knelt before my sarcophagus, as if I were a sainted thing, yet none dared to meet the man buried inside. When they spoke, it was to the machine. The Dreadnought fights with us. The Dreadnought's fury is unmatched. I screamed within the vox, begged them to see me, to speak my name, but what came through was static, garbled fragments of speech filtered through the coffin's distortion. To them I was already something other, a half-living myth locked behind a grill of iron. The first battle in my new form should have been triumphant. My weapons roared with a fury greater than anything my mortal hands had ever wielded. Twin-linked bolters shredded enemies like wheat beneath the scythe. My power fist crushed an orc knob into a smear of flesh and armor with a single strike. The battlefield trembled beneath my stride, and for a fleeting moment I understood why the chapter had done this. I was devastation made manifest, but the triumph was hollow. Each kill, each victory rang empty. There was no rush of blood in my veins, no comrades' voices echoing in my ears, no heartbeat to remind me I was still alive. Only the hum of reactors and the endless drone of machine spirits whispering inside my mind. The glory of war was gone, only duty remained. When the battle was done, they prayed over me again. They spoke of honor, of eternal service, of my soul bound to the Emperor's will. They called it immortality. I knew it for what it was, a prison that would never open, a sentence without end. I was trapped between life and death, a hollow echo of a warrior who should have been allowed to rest. And as silence fell upon the battlefield, broken only by the distant wailing of the dying, I asked myself the question that would never leave me. What is the worth of victory, when the cost is never dying? If such things can still be called nights within this metal tomb, when the world grows silent enough that I almost believe I can hear my own heartbeat again, it is of course an illusion. A phantom rhythm conjured by memory, because the coffin that holds me pumps no blood, houses no lungs, sustains no flesh that might stir with the quiet miracle of life. Yet the mind clings to its lies. It whispers, perhaps to shield me from despair, perhaps to mock me further. The silence between battles is the cruelest of all torments. In war at least, I can drown the emptiness in the thunder of weapons and the roar of engines, but when the guns fall quiet and the brothers return to their fortress monastery, I am left alone with the machine's hum, the endless drone of its reactors thrumming like an insect at the edge of hearing. They seal me in the reclusium, row upon row of slumbering giants surrounding me. Some have lain dormant for centuries, stirred only when the chapter has dire need. Their silence is not peace. It is the heavy, suffocating hush of the tomb. At first I raged against it. I hammered my mind against the barriers of steel and code, howling prayers and curses alike into the void of the vox, demanding the machine god release me, demanding the emperor's mercy. But rage is finite, and despair infinite. Soon enough, I learned the stillness of my prison, how to let the silence swallow me whole until even thought grew sluggish, like a flame starved of air. That is what they call slumber, this dreamless stasis between wars. They present it as a mercy, a way to ease the burden of eternity. To me it feels like drowning in a sea, with no surface, no end, only the pressure of darkness pressing down for endless ages. Yet slumber does not erase memory. Memory lingers like a wound that will not heal. When the tech marines stir me from the dark, the first thing I feel is the weight of all the years I did not live. Decades, perhaps centuries, stripped from me in silence. My brothers, those I had once fought beside, are gone. In their place, I awaken to strangers who wear the same heraldry, but speak with different voices, who know my name not as a man but as a relic. To them, I am history walking, a piece of the chapter's legend pulled from its vaults. But to me they are ghosts of a family I will never touch again. Once a young Astartes approached me after a battle, his armor still slick with the blood of Xenos. He looked up at me with awe, and whispered that fighting alongside me was an honor beyond words. His voice trembled with reverence, as though he was speaking to the Emperor himself. I wanted to take his shoulder, to remind him I had been a warrior like him once, a man of flesh who laughed and bled and feared. I wanted to tell him not to wish for this fate, not to envy it. But what came through the vox was a distorted growl, a machine's echo. His eyes widened in awe, not understanding that what he heard was not my voice at all, but the coffin speaking for me. That moment has haunted me more than any battle, because in his eyes I saw not respect, but belief in a lie that I am noble, that I am eternal, that this prison is glory. And so the cycle continues. The young envy the relic envies the dead, and no one dares break the chain, for fear of dishonoring the chapter's sacred duty. There are whispers, even within the sarcophagus. The machine spirits murmur when the silence grows too deep, half-formed fragments of code that bleed into my thoughts. Sometimes they sound like voices I once knew. Comrades lost, captains dead, even my own voice echoing back at me. Sometimes they speak words I cannot understand, the dialect of the mechanicus, binary hymns and data prayers. But I have come to fear these whispers most of all, because they blur the line between man and machine. Each passing year, each slumber, I feel their presence more keenly, as though they are waiting, patient and eternal, for the day my will fades enough for them to take what remains. Perhaps that is the truest curse of the Dreadnought. Not that we are entombed forever, but that in time even our souls may not remain our own. I remember the day of my entombment more vividly than any battle, not because it was glorious, but because it was the last day I was ever whole. My body had been broken beyond repair, shredded by plasma fire and the talons of alien beasts. I should have died there, my name carried back in a litany of honor, a place granted in the chapter's rolls of the fallen. But the apothecaries judged me worthy, or cursed enough to endure a different fate. My brothers sang as they bore my ruined shell to the sarcophagus. The chaplain's voice thundered in the reclusium, echoing the praises of the emperor, swearing that I would serve eternal, and through it all I screamed inside, though my mouth could no longer shape the words. The first time the coffin closed around me, I thought I would go mad. The clamps locking into my shattered flesh, the needles burrowing into bone, the vox grill hissing as it swallowed my voice. The machine spirit surged like fire in my veins, drowning me in alien cold. For an instant I felt as though I had been erased, My soul dissolved into the machine's vast indifference. And then, suddenly, I was there again, awake, hearing my own voice echo through the coffin's speakers as the tech marines hailed me as reborn. But that voice was not mine. It was deeper, heavier, a hollow bell tolling from the abyss. And in that moment, I understood I would never speak as myself again. They dressed it in ceremony, as they always do. They called me venerable. They swore my name would echo for millennia, that my body had become a weapon holier than any blade. But the truth behind their hymns is simpler. I had been stolen from death, not saved, not spared. Stolen, bound and repurposed as a tool, a living weapon that would never know rest. My chapter saw honor. I felt only the theft. And so began the long cycle of waking and sleeping, of war and silence, of eternity stretched thin as wire. With every awakening, I lost another piece of myself. At first it was names, brothers I had once known intimately. Their laughter, their scars, their stories vanished, like smoke in the wind. Then it was faces. I remembered that I had fought beside men I loved, but I could not summon their features. Then the small things, the taste of recaf, the sound of rain on ceramite, the ache of fatigue after drills, all of them washed away by centuries of metal and silence. Now when I search my memory, all I find are fragments, the glint of a blade in the dark, the cry of a sergeant ordering me forward, a hymn sung on the eve of battle, the words lost but the rhythm lingering. These shards are all that remain of the man I was. The rest has been consumed, fed to the machine that holds me. Still I endure, because that is what we do, because the Emperor demands it, because my chapter kneels before me as a living relic, and prays for my strength. And in their eyes I cannot falter. I must bear the burden, must uphold the illusion that this is glory. If I spoke the truth, if I told them of the silence, the theft, the drowning emptiness, they would not believe me, or worse, they would believe, and despair would spread like fire through their ranks. No, my suffering must remain mine alone. That too is part of the duty. And so I wait, caught between war and silence, between memory and oblivion. I am the threshold itself, neither living nor dead, neither man nor machine. And though I endure, I cannot help but wonder what lies beyond this cycle. Does the Emperor watch me still? Does he hear the prayers whispered through my coffin walls? Or has even he turned his gaze away, leaving me to drift forever in the darkness I once swore to conquer? The silence offers no answer, only the hum of reactors, the endless waiting, the slow erasure of the self. I endure, because there is nothing else I can do. But every time the tech marines seal me back into the dark, I find myself whispering a single thought, too faint to pass through the vox, too fragile to endure, against the machine's echo. Let me rest. The coffin does not answer. When the seals broke again and the machine spirit stirred, I knew at once that this was not to be a simple deployment against raiders or heretics. There was a weight in the air, a tension that hummed even through the sarcophagus walls. I could hear the priests of the mechanicus chanting longer than usual, their binharic prayers stuttering like sparks across a failing circuit. The tech marines moved with grim haste, their hands trembling slightly as they offered the final litanies of ignition. Even before the first sensory feeds flooded my mind, I knew we faced something far worse than the endless churn of human rebellion. And then I heard it, not with ears but with something deeper, older, a pressure against the edges of my thoughts, like claws scraping the inside of my skull, the first taste of the tyrannids. The Xeno's hunger is not merely physical, it is psychic, a tide of devouring will that seeps into every corner of the battlefield long before their bodies ever arrive. To stand against them is to feel that hunger in your marrow, to know that you are nothing more than prey being stalked. Even now, entombed in this coffin of iron and fire, I could feel it probing at me, testing my mind as surely as their talons would later test my armor. When the hatches opened and my sarcophagus was wrenched into the Titan's cavernous hold, the stench struck me like a hammer. Not the holy oils of the mechanicum, nor the ozone of charged plasma, but something fouler, the reek of alien ichor clinging to scorched earth, carried in by the winds of a world already gnawed to the bone. I could see it through the auger feed, the land stretched out below in a lattice of chitin and pulsing biomass, the very soil reshaped into a living organism. Whole cities lay drowned beneath it, their spires jutting out like bones through rotting flesh, and moving across it in endless waves, the swarm itself gaunts by the thousand synapse creatures towering behind them, winged horrors blotting out the sky. I had faced many enemies before, but the Tyranids are not an army, they are a hunger given form. To fight them is to fight inevitability itself, the grinding certainty of consumption. You do not outmaneuver them, for they learn. You do not frighten them, for they feel no fear. You do not kill them fast enough, for every corpse becomes nourishment for 10 more. And still we marched out to face them, not because we believed we could truly win, but because there was no one else to stand between them and the worlds of mankind. My Titan shook as its great engines roared to life, the plasma reactor surging behind me like a captive sun. The crew whispered their oaths, each voice carried through the vox grills, their words small and brittle against the storm we approached. I felt their fear as clearly as if it were my own heartbeat, yet I also felt their resolve. They were only men, fragile, mortal, destined to die, but in that moment they stood as tall as any astartes, perhaps taller. They knew the swarm would not break. They knew their names would likely never be remembered beyond this battle, and still they marched with me into the abyss. The first clash came like a storm breaking. Gargoyles descended in shrieking clouds, their wings tearing through the polluted air, their spittle burning as it struck the Titan's hull. I turned my cannons upon them, and the sky blossomed with fire. For every dozen I killed, another dozen swooped in, talons raking, bodies bursting against the void shields. The smaller gaunts poured forward in seething tides, their screeches a chorus of hunger, their claws scoring trenches into the earth as they scrambled to reach us. My weapons spoke in thunder, and whole swathes of them evaporated in the wash of plasma and flame. Yet still they came, crawling over the corpses of their kin, forming living ramps of flesh to breach our walls. Even as I crushed them beneath my stride, the pressure in my mind grew worse. The hive mind was watching, not as an individual predator, not as some commander issuing orders, but as an ocean of thought pressing down on a single stone. Its attention was vast, impersonal, suffocating, and somewhere within it, I felt amusement, as though it regarded me not as an enemy, but as a curiosity, a relic struggling pointlessly against the tide. I roared into the vox, though whether it was defiance or desperation I could not say. My guns answered louder than I ever could, tearing through their monstrous forms. But even as ichor sprayed and wings crumpled, I knew the truth in my core. Against the Tyranids, destruction was meaningless. For every one I slew, the hive learned. For every blast of fire, the swarm shifted and adapted. I was not eroding them, I was teaching them how to kill me better. And yet there was no turning back. The swarm did not relent. It never does. My weapons screamed, the Titan's cannons glowing with heat, barrels trembling with the rhythm of unending fire. Each discharge shook the world, each impact lit the battlefield like false dawn. Gaunts disintegrated in sprays of burning ichor, their bodies tossed like scraps into the air before vanishing into steam and smoke. Yet the gap they left closed almost instantly, filled by more, always more, the tide surging forward with inhuman precision. Their bodies were expendable, their lives meaningless, because the hive did not think of them as individuals at all. They were cells in a greater body, nerves in a monstrous brain, and to kill one was to accomplish nothing more than cutting a strand of hair. The sky was no safer. My augur redouts painted the heavens in a shifting mass of hostile signatures, gargoyles wheeling in great flocks while the heavier winged beasts circled beyond, waiting for the shields to falter. Their screeches rattled through my vox ports, harmonizing with the ground swarm's endless roars into a single maddening chorus. For a moment, even buried within adamantine, I felt as though I were drowning in their sound. A cacophony meant to break sanity before teeth or claw could reach flesh. I pushed forward, my Titan's footsteps cratering the earth, its armor dripping with alien gore. The crew chanted war prayers with every volley, their voices sharp, desperate, trying to carve order into the chaos. One voice broke, a gunner gasping as the pressure of the hive mind found him, sliding into his thoughts like oil on water. I could feel it too, gnawing at the edges of my perception, a whisper that promised inevitability. It was not temptation, not like the lies of chaos. There was no offer of glory or power here, only certainty. The certainty that resistance was useless, that in the end all things were meet. I crushed it beneath rage, not the pure noble fury of a warrior saint, but the animal hatred of something cornered and defiant. My cannons roared, scything down a knot of carnifexes that thundered toward our lines. The beasts fell, their plated bodies cracking open in showers of green fire, but their dying spasms tore through the front line like wrecking balls, flattening imperial trenches and scattering guardsmen into the air like toys. The mortal soldiers screamed. Their last fire was a spark against a hurricane, their courage brittle before the oncoming wave, and still they stood. That sight burned into me. Men in flak armor, men who would die at a thought from any true predator, holding against an ocean of monsters. Their courage was not born of faith in victory. It was the refusal to collapse before the inevitable. They knew, as I knew, that this battle was not one to be won. It was one to be endured, long enough that perhaps a few transports might break orbit, or a fleet might arrive from beyond the stars, or the hive itself might be delayed for one more precious day. A shadow fell across me then, and the augur's warning runes screamed. From the sky descended a tyrant, vast and grotesque, its wings tattered but powerful, its talons longer than tank barrels. It shrieked, and the swarm redoubled, as though the will of the hive itself were now made flesh before me. I fired, and the creature reeled, ichors spraying in arcs across the battlefield. But it did not fall. It came on, weaving between my barrages, its scream vibrating through the Titan's frame. The impact nearly toppled me, its talons clamped onto the void shield, sparks erupting as it raked downward, tearing at layers of protective energy. I staggered back, knees gouging trenches in the earth, gunners howling into their vox as alarms cascaded across the consoles. The hive tyrant's eyes glowed with alien intellect, the raw gaze of the swarm focused into two burning points. I could feel its mind pressing harder now, hammering against the sarcophagus, trying to find purchase. I bellowed through the machine's vox horns, a sound like mountains breaking, a roar that shook the battlefield. For an instant, the men below faltered in their fear, and looked up, as though the god machine itself defied annihilation. The tyrant shrieked back, and in that clash of sound the war became a duel, one relic of ancient humanity against the devouring future. I did not know if I could hold, but I knew this. I would not yield. The duel stretched into eternity, though by the measures of war it could not have lasted more than moments. Every strike of the tyrant's claws rang like thunder, each blow against the void shield peeling away another layer of fragile protection. My Titan lurched beneath the onslaught, servos screaming, armor groaning as though the spirit within the machine itself felt fear. I fired until the barrels of my cannons ran white-hot, until the smell of burning promethium filled the cockpit, acrid and suffocating even through the filters. Yet the monster would not release its grip. It clung with a desperate ferocity, determined to drag me down beneath the tide of its kin. I could sense the shift in the swarm's rhythm. With the tyrant as its spearhead, the hive had grown sharper, more coordinated. Gaunts hurled themselves in great waves at my knees, clawing at armor they could never hope to breach, buying fractions of distraction. Warriors advanced behind them, synapse creatures anchoring the lesser beasts in place, guiding them with alien precision. Every strike, every movement felt orchestrated by one intelligence, vast and incomprehensible. The gunners inside my Titan screamed prayers through cracked lips, their hands blistered from the heat of controls, their voices hoarse from chanting litanies of fire. One collapsed, blood frothing at his mouth, the strain too great for a mortal frame. Another dragged him aside, his own eyes hollow but determined, and took his place without hesitation. Such was the devotion the Imperium demanded, that a man might burn out his life in service to a machine that itself was but a vessel for another half-dead soul. The tyrant pressed harder, its talons grinding sparks from the shield projectors, its maw opening wide enough that I could see the cavernous black throat, lined with glistening teeth. Its breath fogged the external senses, a stench of rot and ammonia that pierced even through the layers of steel and sacred oil. It roared again, and in that roar I felt not just hatred, but hunger. Not simple need for sustenance, but a hunger vast enough to hollow out stars, an emptiness that could only be filled by everything that lives. I answered with the Titan's plasma annihilator. The beam tore through the creature's torso, searing flesh from bone, blowing one wing into ash. The sound of it shook mountains, the flash brighter than the sun. The tyrant shrieked and writhed, echo, raining like molten glass, splattering across the ground in steaming pools. Yet still it clung, half its body ruined, mind shrieking through the link that bound it to the swarm. And the swarm answered. The ground heaved as monstrous shapes emerged from the mass, carnifexes and trigons charging together, hurling themselves at my legs, battering me with their massive weight. The Titan staggered, alarms shrieking, plates denting under the hammer of living siege engines. I fought to remain upright, every step carving craters, every swing of my arm-mounted weaponry smashing through ranks of beasts that surged in endless supply. The tyrant clawed deeper, jaws snapping against armor, talons ripping cables and conduits that spat sparks like lightning. And in that chaos, I felt it again, the pressure, the whisper, the hive mind pressing against the thin walls of my coffin, testing, probing, seeking a fracture. It spoke in no words I could comprehend, but in sensations and impressions, the futility of resistance, the inevitability of dissolution, the promise that even iron and fire would be digested, broken down, remade into something that served the greater whole. I felt it pressing at my memories, clawing at the last tatters of who I had once been, trying to strip away the soldier, the man, until nothing remained but meat and fuel. I roared back. Not through words, not even through thought, but through the Titan itself. I drove my will into the machine's spirit, fusing soul and steel until the boundaries blurred. Together we became a single entity, ancient and furious, a relic that had fought since the Great Crusade, now burning itself to cinders rather than bow to alien inevitability. My weapons thundered, my fists smashed, my shields flared with light enough to blind. The tyrant fell. It tumbled from my chest in a storm of flame and echo, crashing to the earth with a sound like an avalanche. Its death scream echoed through the swarm, a ripple of psychic backlash that staggered the lesser beasts for the briefest heartbeat. I seized that moment. I advanced. My Titan stepped over the corpse, crushing gaunts into paste, driving its cannons into the writhing masses ahead. The battlefield was no less dire, no less drowned in bodies, but for an instant the swarm faltered. For an instant the impossible seemed a fraction less inevitable, and in that fraction, I remembered what it felt like to believe. The silence after the tyrant's fall was not true silence, but in war even the brief stutter in an endless chorus of screams can feel like a sacred reprieve. My Titan stood amidst the wreckage, its frame cracked and groaning, its void shields guttering like candles starved of air. Around me, the swarm pulled back, not in retreat, for tyranids do not retreat, but in the strange hesitation that follows when a mind is cut from its anchor. The hive had lost one of its voices, and for a heartbeat it recalibrated. I knew that heartbeat would end. Through cracked lenses and fogged auspex, I saw the battlefield stretched before me, a landscape of ruin where cities had once stood. Manufactorum towers lay broken like ribs, their steel bones jutting skyward, their veins of promethium spilling rivers that burned in blue and green fire. The earth itself shifted under the weight of the swarm, billions of chitinous feet grinding corpses into the mud, stripping every inch of resource from the bones of this world. I had seen worlds die before, but never like this. This was not conquest, this was consumption. Inside the coffin of my Dreadnought chamber, pain returned in waves. My spine felt as if it were nailed to the steel, each nerve on fire, each muscle refusing to remember it had once been flesh. The life support fluid stank of old blood and rusted copper, seeping through the filters, clinging to my tongue. I tried to swallow and choked instead, coughing against tubes that did not care whether I breathed or drowned. There is no dignity in survival within a dreadnought, only endurance. The vox crackled, distorted by static and the shrieking of corrupted signals. I caught fragments of voices, battle chants, orders screamed in desperation, cries for air support that would never come. Somewhere across the lines, the Astra Militarum still held their ground, their regiments reduced to shattered companies, their tanks half buried in corpses. I envied them, not their mortality, but their certainty. For a guardsman, death was final, clean, a bullet, a claw, an end. For me there would be no end. Only the endless cycle of waking in iron, fighting, falling, waking again if the sarcophagus endured. The swarm gathered once more, and I braced for the storm. Yet before they surged, the hive shifted its focus. I felt it, like a change in the pressure of the air, a tide pulling back before the next wave. They were not done with me. They were watching, studying, testing the walls of my mind as much as the plating of my machine. For the first time I wondered whether my endurance was not a curse to me alone, but an opportunity for them. A way to measure the Imperium's might against their own endless hunger. I thought then of terror. Not the terror that exists now, shrouded in the stink of billions and drowned in the glow of the Astronomicon, but of the terror I had glimpsed as a boy, hollows of a world I had never seen, painted in light and hope, where the Emperor's face gleamed from banners, where spires reached so high they pierced the heavens themselves. I had carried that vision into war, into death, into the sarcophagus. It had dulled with the years, faded under the weight of rust and battle, but here, facing the unending hunger, I grasped at it again, not as hope, but as defiance. The swarm moved, as one. The hesitation was gone, the faltering repaired. From the horizon to the broken bones of the city they surged, a tide black and writhing, wings beating like thunder, claws flashing with the light of burning manufactorums. I turned my Titan into their advance, every weapon humming, every system screaming, machine spirit raging in harmony with my own failing heart. There would be no victory here, only survival, and even that would come at a price no one should have to pay. The first of the swarm struck like a storm front, their bodies slamming into the Titan's legs, climbing its armor, tearing at anything they could reach. My autocannons roared, cutting swathes through their ranks, every burst a river of fire. The machine shuddered as the recoil thrummed through its battered frame, each weapon cycle a reminder that I was burning through what little ammunition remained. It didn't matter. In this moment, hesitation was death. I felt the Dreadnought's limbs lag, servos whining in protest. The machine spirit was weary, its rage tempered by exhaustion, its voice in my skull a broken growl that matched my own. I whispered to it, half prayer, half command, and the Titan lurched forward again, stomping down on a knot of chitin and flesh, grinding Tyranid forms into pulp. Acid blood hissed as it burned against ceramite plating, seeping through cracks, corroding deeper into wounds the Titan could not heal. Every strike I delivered cost me another piece of the machine, another piece of myself. They were everywhere. Spinagonts darted between broken ruins, spitting gouts of bioplasma that splattered across my armor. Warriors leapt onto the hull, their talons screeching against the plating as they hacked at the seams. I twisted, crushing one against the shattered wall of a collapsed hab block, but three more clambered over its corpse, shrieking with alien fury. For each I killed, a dozen took its place. It was no battle, it was drowning, the ocean made of flesh and hunger. In the shadow of my cockpit's red gloom, I remembered the apothecary's words from long ago, when my broken body was first lowered into the Dreadnought sarcophagus. He told me I was being given a second chance, that the Emperor's light had judged my service worthy, that this machine was both tomb and blessing. But blessings are not meant to rot. Blessings are not meant to scream with every movement, to choke on blood recycled through iron lungs, to see comrades live and die while I linger, nailed to eternity. This was no blessing, it was punishment. The ground quaked, and the swarm parted. A shadow rose above them, taller than the ruins, taller even than the Titan's battered form. A carnifex, plated in bone thicker than the steel of a fortress gate, charged forward, its bellow shaking the wreckage around us. Its eyes, if such things could be called eyes, burned with instinctive purpose. This beast was no drone, it was war incarnate. I braced, flooding what remained of the plasma coils, feeling the heat bleed through the sarcophagus walls, threatening to cook me alive in my coffin. The gun roared, a sphere of incandescent fury slamming into the carnifex and tearing through one shoulder in a geyser of molten ichor. It screamed but did not fall. It came on, dragging half a ruined arm, smashing through its own kin, driven by the hive's command. I fired again. The Titan's frame bucked, alarms wailing as coolant failed, as fire licked at the edges of my vision. The blast poured through its chest, yet still it surged forward, momentum carrying it into me like a crashing world. We fell together, my Titan's back slamming into the ruins, the impact rattling the sarcophagus so hard I thought my bones would shatter all over again. Claws tore into plating, screeching sparks, trying to rip me open, to expose the screaming mortal thing hidden in iron. I drove the power fist up into its gut, feeling bones snap and organs rupture. It shrieked, spraying acid that sizzled against the canopy. With a final wrench, I crushed its throat, the beast convulsing in death spasms, its carcass pinning me beneath the writhing tide. Buried in ruin, half the Titan's systems dead, I lay in the dark, breathing through blood and fluid, listening to the scrape of countless tyrannid claws drawing closer. For a moment, there was no machine spirit, no war, no Imperium, only the realization that I was not meant to live through this. That survival had become its own kind of damnation, and yet still, I fought, because that is what we are made to do, to fight, to endure, even when the price is beyond measure. The swarm pressed closer, their shapes cutting off what little light filtered through the ruins above me. I could hear them, claws raking, chitin grinding, bodies piling upon one another as they sought the weakness in my armor. The Titan's machine spirit murmured in broken fragments, its once proud voice now reduced to static-laden whispers in the back of my skull. It begged for release, yet still it obeyed. Its pain was mine, its rage mine, our fates bound together like iron shackles that neither of us had chosen. With the carnifex carcass still sprawled across my chest, the Titan was trapped. Systems flickered in and out, smoke coiling through the cockpit vents, clogging my throat with the taste of burnt promethium and blood. I forced the sarcophagus to feed more power into the fist, pistons groaning, hydraulics shrieking as I shoved the corpse aside. For a moment, the machine hesitated, as though weighing the cost of obedience. Then it moved, with the stubbornness of a warrior too proud to die. The weight shifted, rubble cascaded. I dragged myself up, one limb at a time, crushing gaunts beneath my steps, as though they were little more than vermin. The swarm screamed and surged again, as if sensing the faintest flicker of weakness. They hurled themselves against me with manic hunger, climbing my legs, tearing at joints and cabling. Some crawled across the Titan's arms, gnashing at armor seals, while others spat acid that hissed like boiling water on steel. Each impact was another wound, another scar upon a body that could no longer heal. My vision blurred, not from smoke this time, but from memory. I saw the men I once fought beside, their faces clear as day in the red-lit tomb, brothers whose bones now rested in imperial soil or drifted as dust in forgotten voids. I heard their laughter, their vows, their last screams. They had died when death came for them, swiftly, cleanly, with honor. And I had been denied even that. I had been chained into a body that would not let me leave. Perhaps that was why I hated the Tyrannids most, not for their hunger, nor for their destruction, but for the mirror they held up to me. They too were slaves, slaves to a will beyond them, to an eternal hunger that gave them no choice but to consume and consume until nothing remained. When I looked into their alien eyes, I saw myself. The plasma coils rattled within my chest. With what energy remained, I unleashed another blast into the heart of the swarm. Fire turned night to day, bodies reduced to molten ash, shadows cast sharp against the ruins. But the horde was endless, always more, always closer. The Titan staggered, its arm hanging by a single trembling actuator. The machine spirit whimpered. I could not tell if it was dying, or if it was already dead. Then, through the haze, a sound, not the screeches of tyrannids, nor the groan of failing machinery, but the low thunder of engines and the hiss of voxcaster hymnals. The ground trembled anew, not from the swarm but from the arrival of armored treads. Lehman Russ battle tanks roared from the ash clouds, las cannons blazing, their imperial aquilers glinting in the dim light. Behind them, the banners of the Astra Militarum rose, ragged but unbroken. The swarm faltered. Gaunts shrieked as tanks tore them apart with disciplined fire. Basilisks thundered from far behind, their shells cratering the earth, ripping swathes from the chittering tide. And for the first time in what felt like eternity, I was not alone. I raised the Titan's ruined fist skyward, as though saluting the mortals who fought on foot beside gods of steel. The sight was almost enough to ignite something long dead in my chest, something dangerously close to hope. But hope is a cruel thing, and I knew better. Reinforcements were not salvation, they were only a brief reprieve. The Tyranids would return, the swarm would adapt, and I would still be here, bound, breathing in iron, waiting for a death that would never come. The machine spirit stirred faintly, its voice barely a whisper. Together we rose one final time from the ruins, shoulder to shoulder with the tanks and soldiers who still fought under the Emperor's light. In that instant, I was no longer certain if I fought for them, or if I fought simply because I no longer knew how to stop. The swarm screamed again, the night roared with fire, and survival as always came with its curse. When the battle was over, silence did not return. It never truly does, not on a world scarred by Tyranids. Instead, the air filled with the groans of settling ruins, the hissing of acid pools still eating through stone, and the faint trembling cries of men who had lived when others had not. Victory was a word too fragile for what lay around me. The swarm was scattered, yes, its bodies piled in grotesque mounds that steamed beneath the pale moonlight, but we all knew it would return. It always did. The Tyranids were not beaten, they were delayed, and every delay came at a cost measured in flesh, spirit, and sanity. The Astra Militarum moved among the dead with grim efficiency. Their boots crunched over alien carapace, their respirators rasped, their hands shook as they dragged the wounded back behind the lines. They looked upon me, this towering sarcophagus of a war machine, with eyes that mingled awe with fear. To them I was salvation given form, but also a reminder of what salvation cost. I could hear their whispers even without the vox, muffled prayers to the god Emperor, voices trembling as they spoke of the Dreadnought that would not die. I wished I could correct them, tell them I was no saint, no miracle. I was a prison. My voice, filtered through crackling vox grill, emerged as little more than a growl, commands to regroup, to fortify, to burn the bodies. Some obeyed without question, as if hearing the judgment of some spirit descended from the heavens. Others flinched, eyes darting to the sarcophagus embedded in my chest as if it might open and reveal the broken thing inside. They did not know me. They only knew the machine. Perhaps that was for the best. The battlefield itself was a ruin of memories I could not silence. The stench of charred chitin, mixed with promethium smoke, clung to everything. Black ichor pooled where the swarm had fallen, its strange sweetness bitter in the throat. In the silence between explosions I could almost hear the skittering again, claws upon stone, mandibles gnashing in the dark. My machine spirit felt it too. It trembled against me, murmuring half-formed litanies, as if trying to soothe itself from terrors that could not be forgotten. I whispered back to it, not words but intent, the steady pressure of a will that refused to bend. Together we endured. And yet endurance is not the same as peace. That night, after the tanks had withdrawn and the men had dug their trenches deeper into the broken city, I stood sentinel over the ruins. Each flicker of movement in the shadows made my sarcophagus tense. Each echo of stone crumbling set my weapons primed for fire. There was no rest for me, no true reprieve. My dreams, if they could be called such, were nothing but flashes of memory spliced with machine data, overlapping until I could not tell whether the cries in my mind belonged to fallen brothers or to vox-distorted ghosts. It was then that I first heard it, the whisper not of my machine spirit, nor of the men but something else. A murmur that drifted on the edges of thought, low and insidious, like the hiss of a forgotten hymn. At first I thought it was the swarm, some lingering echo of the hive mind brushing against my prison. But the words, if they were words at all, were different. They spoke of endurance not as curse, but as destiny. They spoke of chains as though they were crowns. I tried to silence it, to smother the sound beneath litanies of the Emperor, but it remained, a shadow behind every thought. Perhaps it was madness. Perhaps it was simply the bleed of long-forgotten memories resurfacing through cracked synapses. Or perhaps it was something else entirely, something waiting for the moment my will weakened enough to answer. The city stretched silent around me, lit only by the pale fire of pyres and the occasional flare shot skyward by Imperial scouts. Men wept softly in their trenches, their voices trembling with songs of home. I envied them their frailty, for in frailty lies release. They would die, and their suffering would end. Mine would not. And in the quiet, the whisper came again, clearer this time, closer. It did not speak of salvation. It spoke of purpose. And though I loathed it, a small part of me feared it was right. The days that followed blurred together, each one a mirror of the last, as though time itself had stagnated within the ruins. The Tyranids had been pushed back, but their spoor hung heavy on the air, their scent of death and resin clinging to every broken wall. Men patrolled, fortified and prayed, their mortal cycles of fear and fatigue marching ever onward. For me, time was no such comfort. Hours or days made no difference. I was awake always, the endless vigil, and each moment weighed upon me like a slab of iron pressing deeper into the coffin I could never leave. The whispers did not fade. They grew bolder. I tried to ignore them, to drown them beneath the thrum of the machine spirit and the crackle of the vox, but silence brought them back, louder, more insistent. They were not like the hive mind, not vast and alien and unfeeling. These whispers were intimate, as though a voice leaned close beside my ruined ear, murmuring in words only I could hear. They spoke of endurance, yes, but also of legacy, of being chosen to suffer because I was strong enough to bear what others could not. It was the language of chains recast as glory, pain wrapped in the shroud of destiny. When I walked among the ruins, the soldiers parted before me like waves before a prow. Some bowed their heads, making the sign of the Aquila. Others avoided my gaze, their eyes too full of fear to look upon me for long. They did not hear what I heard. They only saw a war machine, a titan of ceramite and adamantium, eternal and unyielding. How could they know that within the armored shell, the warrior they revered strained against madness? To them I was unbreakable. To me, I was breaking slowly, one whisper at a time. On the third night after the swarm had been shattered, a storm came, not of Xenos, but of nature itself, as if the world mourned what it had endured. Lightning flared across the broken skyline, illuminating towers split in half, manufactorums gutted by claws and fire. Rain hissed as it struck burning pyres, steam rising in ghostly columns that shrouded the city in a fog of the dead. I stood unmoving, sentinel against the storm, and for a moment I thought the whispers had gone, but they had not. They came with the thunder. Each crash of the sky seemed to carry their cadence, each echo of lightning a syllable of their hymn. They told me that even the storm bowed before me, that the earth itself trembled when I strode upon it. They told me I was more than flesh, more than steel. They told me I was eternal. I wanted to deny them, to cry out in rage, but my voice, when it came, was little more than static across the vox. I uttered the Emperor's name again and again, clinging to it like a drowning man to a broken raft. The storm swallowed my words, but still I spoke them, for silence would mean surrender. And then I felt something shift. Not outside but within. The machine spirit stirred differently, as though listening not only to me but to the whispers as well. For an instant I felt it waver, as if torn between two masters or two truths. My will snapped down upon it, iron and unyielding, forcing it back into obedience. But the doubt remained, lodged deep like a splinter that could not be pulled free. When the storm ended, the men sang. Their hymns were cracked and faltering, but they sang to honor their dead and to steel themselves for the battles still to come. I envied them again, Their songs brought comfort, even if only for a night. My song was silence, broken only by whispers I could never share. Yet, despite the dread they brought, despite the cracks they widened within me, part of me listened, part of me wondered if perhaps they were not lies. If perhaps endurance itself was a kind of victory, if perhaps there was no release waiting in death, and that this prison was not punishment but preservation. That thought terrified me more than the Tyranids ever could. The silence that followed the storm was worse than the battle, worse than the rain, worse even than the whispers. The city lay still, its bones smoldering beneath the faint glow of lightning-scorched skies. The soldiers moved cautiously, their boots crunching over broken glass and the brittle shells of Tyranid carapace. But I remained immovable, anchored in place like a monument to all that had been endured. It was in this silence that I began to dream again. Dreaming is a cruel gift for one who cannot sleep. My mind would wander without my bidding, visions bleeding through like oil through water. Sometimes I dreamed of the chapter halls, of banners untouched by ash, of brothers still alive. Other times I dreamed of nothing at all, only the endless black, and in that black the whispers thrived. They told me there was no waking, no respite, no end. They told me I was theirs. One night, as the garrison prepared for the inevitable counterattack, I overheard two guards speaking near the broken gate. They thought me dormant, my systems low, my awareness dulled. One whispered that I was no longer a warrior, but a relic of horror, a half-living corpse bound in iron, and worshipped only because men feared what I represented. The other hushed him, warning against blasphemy, but I knew the first had spoken truth. They did not see me as a man. They did not even see me as a weapon. They saw me as something between myth and machine, useful so long as I stood, terrifying if ever I faltered. Their words dug into me, not because they were lies but because they were true. I had become something less than human, yet more than human. I was both revered and reviled, holy and grotesque. And the whispers twisted that truth, using it to carve deeper into the remnants of who I once was. The days blurred again, each one marked by the scraping of servitors repairing walls, by the hiss of Prometheum as pyres consumed the last of the dead, by the grim hymns muttered over ration fires. But inside me, the battle raged on, not against Tyranids, but against myself, against surrender, against belief, against the slow corrosion of memory that threatened to erase who I had been entirely. It was during one of these endless vigils that I felt it again, the shift within the machine's spirit. Only this time it did not resist me. It welcomed the whispers. For a fleeting instant my vision blurred, as if I saw not through the lenses of my sarcophagus but through some deeper, older sight. I saw the city not as it was, broken and burned, but whole, alive, thriving. I saw men bowing in reverence not to the emperor, but to me. I saw the whispers made flesh, their voices no longer murmurs but a choir of exultation. And then it was gone. I tore myself back from the vision, venting steam in a roar that sent nearby soldiers staggering in fright. They did not understand why I bellowed, why I clawed at the ground, why my weapons cycled in fury without an enemy in sight. They thought it was anger, or grief, or some unknowable reaction of the machine. They did not know that in that moment, I was fighting for my very soul. The whispers laughed. When dawn came, it brought with it another Tyranid probe, small, fast, testing our defenses. We destroyed it, of course. My weapons scythed them down, burning and tearing through chitin and bone until the ground was slick with ichor. But when the last of them lay twitching, I realized that for the first time I had felt no satisfaction, no purpose fulfilled, only emptiness. The men cheered, they sang praises to the emperor, and raised their weapons in triumph. But I could not join them. I could only stand in silence, drowning in the knowledge that the enemy outside our walls was not the greatest threat I faced. It was the enemy within, and as the days stretched on, I began to understand the most horrifying truth of all. The Tyranids would either consume us, or they would be consumed themselves by fire and steel. Their fate was certain. The men would either live or die. Their fate too was certain. But me, my fate was to endure forever, trapped between life and death, between silence and whispers, between memory and oblivion. The horror of the Dreadnought's existence was not that it ended in fire, but that it might never end at all. There are nights when the silence of war is more terrible than its noise. The silence stretches long across the ruins, broken only by the faint hum of power conduits and the hiss of cooling metal within my armored shell. It is in that silence that I feel the weight of eternity pressing most heavily upon me. For while the men around me may cling to hope, may speak of relief fleets or victory parades, I know better. I know what it means to endure forever. The machine does not rest. It does not sleep. Even when battle does not rage, I remain awake, always awake. My sarcophagus is a cage of awareness, denying me the mercy of oblivion. My mind wanders into corners. It should not, gnawing upon itself like a beast trapped in chains. I recall moments from my past, half-formed and distorted, brothers whose faces I cannot fully picture, the oath I once swore before the banners of my chapter. These memories come like ghosts, faint, flickering and cruel. They remind me of what I once was, of what I can never be again. The whispers grow stronger in these hours. They press against the walls of my mind, seeping through the cracks in memory and faith. They tell me I am abandoned. They tell me the Emperor does not see me, that he never did. They laugh at the hymns sung in his name, mocking every word as hollow. They promise me release, but only if I surrender to them. And sometimes in the depths of the long night, I wonder if they are right. For what is faith without an end? What is loyalty when the one you serve remains silent for centuries upon centuries? I have given everything, my body, my soul, my eternity, and yet still I wait, locked in this shell, unseen, unheard, unremembered, except when called to kill. Is this devotion, or is this damnation disguised as duty? The city remains tense, bracing for the swarm's return. Each day scouts report sightings of distant movement, of shadows on the horizon that shift like waves. The Tyranids are not gone. They never truly are. They are patient, hungering, circling as predators do. And I stand at the heart of it all, a weapon too monstrous to be ignored, too sacred to be pitied. Men pass before me and avert their eyes, afraid to look too long, as if the sight of me confirms a fate they dare not imagine for themselves. At times I almost wish for the swarm's full return, not for their victory, but for their endless fury, their mindless hunger. In the storm of their assault, there is no room for whispers, no room for doubt, only the purity of battle, the simplicity of kill or be consumed. The swarm would remind me that I still have a purpose, that I am still needed, if only as a bulwark of metal and fire. But between battles, in this aching eternity of silence, I see the truth more clearly. Purpose is fleeting. Duty is a mask, and beneath it all there is only the prison. I am not free to die. That was taken from me the moment they entombed me within this iron shell. I am not free to live, for life is beyond my reach. What remains is something else entirely, something half-formed, half-forgotten, neither one thing nor the other. That is the curse of the Dreadnought. And as the long hours stretch on, as the city waits for the next storm, I begin to realize that the true enemy was never the Tyranids. The true enemy is time itself. There are moments when the past comes to me unbidden, not in dreams, for I do not dream anymore, but in fragments that strike like stray bolts of lightning. I see the training yards of my youth, where my blade first sang against steel. I see the faces of my brothers in arms, shouting war cries as we charged across ash dunes beneath the crimson banners of our chapter. I see the sky of my homeworld, what was its name, streaked with fire as we swore to carry the Emperor's light to every dark corner of the galaxy. These visions are sharp but fleeting, gone before I can hold them, leaving only a bitter ache. The machine does not care for these memories. The machine remembers only protocols, firing arcs, the slow hum of reactor cycles. It is a cold custodian, preserving me in a half-life, dragging my spirit forward even when I wish to let go. My body is long since ash. My nerves are wire, my veins replaced by promethium tubes and thick cables. Yet still, something of me lingers within, enough to hear the whispers, enough to suffer. The whispers speak of release. They urge me to open myself to the void, to cease resisting, to allow the shadows to claim me. They tell me that the Imperium has forgotten me, that I am not a hero but an instrument discarded until needed again. They speak with many voices, sometimes the tender tone of a brother long dead, sometimes the cruel laughter of enemies who never drew breath. They never rest, they never fall silent, and when I attempt to answer them with prayer, the words feel hollow. The hymns echo within my mind like voices shouted into a cavern, heard by no one. And yet, there is still a spark within me. Perhaps it is faith, though it flickers like a guttering flame. Perhaps it is pride, the stubborn refusal to bend, even if there is nothing left to bend for. I do not know, but when the swarm comes, when the sky blackens with wings and the ground trembles beneath countless claws, the whispers fall silent. In those moments, when war consumes everything, I am not a prisoner, I am a weapon, I am the hand of fire and steel, the barrier between humanity and the endless hunger. It is a paradox that gnaws at me. My prison is my battlefield, and my freedom is only found in slaughter. When peace reigns, I am condemned to wrestle with eternity. When war erupts, I find clarity. Perhaps that is why the machine endures. Perhaps that is why my chapter entombed me within it. Not to save me, not to honor me, but because I am most useful in this state, not as a man, not as a memory, but as a war engine that finds meaning only in the roar of its own destruction. But peace never lasts, and silence always returns. Now in these waiting hours I feel the weight of what eternity truly means. The walls of this sarcophagus will never open. My eyes will never see the stars unfiltered through targeting arrays again. My hands will never feel the weight of a blade unsullied by servos and hydraulics. All that remains is endurance, a kind of endurance that no mortal could comprehend. To them, death is the end. To me it is the one mercy denied. The men who pass before me sometimes leave offerings, small shrines, candles, purity seals affixed to my armor as if to bless me. There are whispers among mortals that those who enter the Dreadnought never truly return. They say our spirits become fractured, half dissolved in the machine, half lost to the Imperium. Perhaps they are right. For when I reach out within myself, I find only fragments, each more distant than the last. Sometimes I hear the voices of those I once knew, my captain, my brothers, even the chants of the chaplain who anointed me before battle. Other times I hear only the howling of things that should not be named. The machine does not silence them. It only makes them louder. The adepts who tend to me know nothing of this. To them I am circuits and sanctified steel, a relic of war to be oiled and maintained. They do not care if the soul within trembles or shatters, only that the weapons fire when commanded. They bow before the armor, not the man entombed within. I have become a symbol, not a life. A talisman of war, animated enough to inspire awe but chained enough never to speak against the weight of duty. And yet, even in this endless imprisonment, there are moments when something different happens. When the veil thins. In the long hours of silence, when my sarcophagus is dark and the world outside has forgotten me, I sometimes sense presences moving in the abyss around my mind. They are not the same as the whispering shadows. They feel vast, ancient, as if entire legions of thought watch from the edge of perception. Some part of me dares to believe these are the Emperor's angels, unseen guardians keeping me tethered. But another part, the darker part, wonders if they are predators circling, waiting for me to weaken so they may devour the last scraps of my being. The truth is, I no longer know the difference between salvation and damnation.